Go right. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on one of the internet's most sprawling and honestly most fascinating conspiracy theories, the lost empire of Tartaria.
So, have you heard of this? I mean, chances are you've probably seen it pop up in a TikTok video or maybe deep in a Reddit thread. It's this wild story about a hidden past, right? A whole global civilization just erased from our memory. But here's the thing. What if the real story, the story of where this idea came from, is even more interesting than the myth itself?
So, the legend, the story that's out there, goes something like this. Tartaria was this incredible, magnificent global empire. We're talking technology that was way, way beyond its time, harnessing things like free energy right out of the atmosphere. And then, bam, a mysterious, catastrophic mud flood just wipes it from the face of the earth. And to top it all off, world governments get together to cover the whole thing up, erasing every last memory of its existence. I mean, you got to admit, it's a compelling, totally epic tale. And it's a tale that has found a huge audience, especially in our digital age. Yeah, and just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about, look at this number, 300 million. That's the number of views on TikTok for the hashtag Tartaria tag alone. This isn't some tiny niche corner of the internet anymore. Oh no, this is a full-blown viral phenomenon.
You know, the writer Zach Mortis, writing for Bloomberg, came up with a really powerful way to describe it. He called it the QAnon of architecture. And it hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It perfectly captures the appeal. It's this grand, sweeping theory that kind of re-enchants the world around you, suggesting that all these ordinary-looking old buildings are actually relics of some lost, superior civilization.
And that really brings us to the heart of the matter, this huge contrast. On one hand, you have the conspiracy claim, a buried global empire. But on the other hand, you have the historical record, which, well, it points to something much, much simpler, a vague label on some old European maps. So let's unpack that. Okay, so where did this name Tartary even come from in the first place? Well, for centuries, Tartary was a totally real term used by Western European mapmakers. But here's the key. It wasn't a country, not an empire. It was basically a placeholder. It was this massive blank spot on the map covering Siberia and Central Asia that to them was just a huge mystery. It was kind of their way of saying, here be dragons, or more accurately, we don't really have a clue what's out here. And it becomes really clear it wasn't one single thing. As the Europeans started to learn a little bit more, they began dividing the region up on their maps. So you'd get Great Tartary for Siberia, Chinese Tartary over in Manchuria, and so on. These were just geographical labels, not some big unified empire. So the name itself, it comes from the Tartars, which was a term for all sorts of Turkic and Mongolic peoples. But, and this is a really interesting detail, Europeans would often slip an extra R in there to make it Tartary. Why? They were deliberately linking it to Tartarus, the hell-like underworld from Greek mythology. And that tells you pretty much everything you need to know about how they saw this place. It was distant, It was scary, and in their minds, it was totally uncivilized. Okay, so how do we get from a simple, kind of spooky map label to this complex intellectual idea of an empire? Well, it turns out a lot of that heavy lifting happened in France. A historian named Matthew Shoshoy actually traces this whole evolution pretty neatly. So, first, from about the 13th to the 16th centuries, Europeans just kind of cobbled together this idea of a Tartar empire from a mix of travel stories, myths, and a whole lot of fear. Then you get to the 1640s, and French scholars try to make it official. They try to formalize this concept, cramming any new information into their old ideas. But then, by the 1740s, the whole thing just falls apart. New, real sources from Persia and China started showing up, and they completely contradicted the myth. It proved there was no single Tartar empire, and so serious academics just dropped it. Right. So if academics and mapmakers basically abandoned the term in the 18th century, how in the world did it get resurrected as this massive 21st century global conspiracy theory? This is where you can really see the transformation happen. The historical Tartary, that was just a map label that became obsolete. It fell out of use. The French idea of Tartary, that was an intellectual concept that got disproven by better evidence. But the modern conspiracy? That's different. It takes this disappearance and completely reimagines it. It wasn't a correction. It was a cover-up. It was the violent destruction of a very real, very powerful global empire. So people who believe in this, they point to what they call proof. For example, they'll look at this grand, ornate 19th century architecture and ask, how could they possibly build that with just horses and buggies? Then they'll see old photos of cities with strangely empty streets and think, that looks like a post-apocalyptic world. And maybe the biggest one, they'll see buildings with doors and windows that are now below ground level and say, aha, that's not a basement. That's evidence of a catastrophic mud flood that buried a whole civilization. But the thing is, there's a much more direct historical context for all of this. Those incredible buildings, they weren't made with some kind of lost ancient tech. They were made with the brand new, cutting-edge technology of the Industrial Revolution. I'm talking about mass-produced structural steel, huge panes of glass, pre-cut stone, things that were simply not possible before. For the first time, you could build these incredible structures all over the world. It wasn't an echo of a lost past. It was literally the dawn of a new architectural age. So, if the proof doesn't really hold up to historical scrutiny, why is this myth more popular today than ever before? I think this quote, which comes straight from the Tartaria community on Reddit, really gets to the heart of it. Maybe the history we've been told is a lie. See, the theory's real power isn't in historical facts. It's in that feeling, that profound distrust of the official story. It gives a voice to that nagging suspicion that the history we all learned in school is incomplete, or maybe even worse, a deliberate lie. Really, its appeal is this perfect cocktail of modern anxieties and desires. You've got a big dose of distrust in institutions, a shot of yearning for a grander, more meaningful past, and you mix it all together in online echo chambers that just keep confirming what you want to believe.
Believing in Tartaria makes you feel like you're in on a secret, you know? Like you're part of the in group, one of the very few who's finally woken up to the real truth. And we have to talk about this. While it might seem like just harmless internet fun, this kind of pseudo-history can get co-opted by some more dangerous ideologies. For instance, some Russian ethno-nationalists have used the myth to try and support modern territorial claims. And the core narrative, this idea of a hidden elite destroying a perfect past, it mirrors other big conspiracy theories like the Great Reset or the New World Order. It all feeds into a much broader distrust of global institutions, and sometimes it ends up completely obscuring real, messy, complex history.
So in the end, the story of Tartaria, this journey from a vague map label to a massive global conspiracy, it probably tells us a lot less about some lost past and a whole lot more about our own present-day anxieties. It really forces us to ask a bigger question, doesn't it? How much